The night was thick with humidity, wrapping the world in a heavy, suffocating blanket. Inside the cramped helicopter, Lieutenant Sarah Matthews sat motionless, her face calm but her mind racing. Around her, the hum of the engines mixed with the nervous whispers of her teammates, each soldier lost in their own thoughts. No one spoke of fear, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface like a shadow waiting to strike. Sarah's fingers tightened around the strap of her rifle. This mission was unlike any she had faced before. Deep behind enemy lines, in a place where one wrong move meant death, she knew there was no room for mistakes. Her training had prepared her for this, but nothing could erase the weight of what was about to come. Outside the small window, the jungle stretched endlessly, a dark sea of trees and tangled undergrowth. The helicopter's steady thump was a constant reminder that they were flying into danger, not away from it. Sarah's breath was slow and controlled, the only sound in her head the rhythmic beating of her heart. She thought of her team, counting on her to lead them through the unknown. Theirs was a silent bond, forged in the kind of pressure few would ever understand. Every step forward was a step deeper into enemy territory, and every second could be their last. Suddenly, the engines seemed to falter for a moment, a tiny shudder that caught everyone's attention. It was barely noticeable, but in the tense atmosphere, it sent a ripple of unease through the cabin. Sarah's eyes darted to the pilot, who gave a quick nod before steadying the aircraft. It was a reminder that danger wasn't just on the ground, it was everywhere. The helicopter dipped slightly as it began its final descent toward the landing zone hidden beneath the thick canopy. The moment to act was close. As the skids touched down, a sudden rush of adrenaline surged through Sarah's body. The roar of the engines was deafening, and the smell of fuel mixed with wet earth filled the air. The soldiers moved quickly, their boots pounding against the soft jungle floor. Sarah took point, her senses razor-sharp as she led her team through the dense underbrush. The weight of her pack, the sweat dripping down her back, it all faded into the background. Her mind was focused on the mission: find the target, complete the extraction, and get out alive. The jungle was alive with sounds, chirping insects, distant animal calls, and the rustle of leaves underfoot. But beneath those natural noises, there was something else. An unseen enemy watching, waiting. Sarah's heart beat faster, but she forced herself to remain calm. Years of training had drilled into her that panic was the enemy's weapon. She scanned the shadows with unblinking eyes, every muscle tense, ready for the first sign of trouble. Without warning, a sudden crack split the air, a gunshot. Time seemed to slow as Sarah reacted instinctively. She dove behind a fallen log, her rifle raised and firing in return. Bullets whizzed past, some striking trees, others kicking up dirt around her teammates. The chaos of battle erupted in a violent storm of noise and motion. Amid the exchange, Sarah felt a sharp, searing pain in her leg. She froze for a split second, then forced herself to keep moving. The bullet had pierced her thigh, but she refused to give in. Blood seeped through her uniform, warm and sticky against her skin. Every step sent waves of agony radiating through her body, but she covered her team's retreat with unwavering determination. She couldn't let anyone see her weakness, not now. The mission depended on it. Her teammates followed her lead, trusting her without question. They didn't know how close she was to collapse, how much the pain threatened to consume her. The enemy fire intensified, and the team scattered to avoid the deadly hail. Sarah stayed low, dragging herself forward, focusing on one thing: survival. Her mind flashed back to grueling training sessions, endless hours pushing through exhaustion and pain. That was what made her different. She had learned to silence her fear, to bury the agony deep beneath layers of discipline. As the firefight continued, the helicopter's return was still minutes away. Sarah's body screamed for rest, but her will refused to listen. She thought about her family, her comrades, and the promise she had made to come home. No matter the cost, she would hold on. The night was far from over, and the real test was just beginning. The jungle around them was alive with whispers and shadows. Every leaf that rustled, every branch that cracked underfoot could mean danger. Sarah moved at the front of the team, every sense on high alert. Her wounded leg throbbed with each step, but she pushed forward, refusing to let pain slow her down. The extraction point was still some distance away, and every second counted. The team's survival depended on speed and silence, but the enemy was closing in, and the tension was suffocating. The dense canopy filtered the moonlight into fractured patches, casting eerie patterns on the forest floor. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and foliage. Sarah's breath came in steady, controlled bursts, a practice drilled into her during countless nights in the field. Her eyes scanned the darkness ahead, looking for anything out of place. The enemy had vanished into the shadows, but she knew they were there, waiting, watching. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a gunshot echoed through the trees. A split second later, bullets tore through the air, forcing the team to drop to the ground. Sarah hit the dirt, her body instinctively curling behind a fallen tree. Pain flared in her leg, a fierce reminder of her injury, but she gritted her teeth and ignored it. She was trained to move through the agony, to fight through the worst moments without faltering. From her position, Sarah spotted a group of enemy combatants advancing toward their location. Their silhouettes moved quickly and silently, weapons at the ready. She signaled to her team with a subtle hand gesture. They knew the plan: hold the position, buy time for the extraction helicopter to arrive. Sarah's mind raced, calculating every possible outcome, every strategy she'd learned over years of grueling training. Her team responded without hesitation, opening fire with precision. The jungle erupted in flashes of light and the thunder of gunshots. Bullets whipped through the air, striking trees and sending leaves flying. Despite the chaos, Sarah's voice remained calm and clear, calling out orders and coordinating the defense. Even with her wound, she was the rock everyone relied on. The firefight dragged on, each second stretching into an eternity. Sarah's strength was fading, but her resolve was unbreakable. She fought not just for herself, but for her teammates, for the mission, for the promise of coming home. The enemy was relentless, their attacks fierce and unyielding. Yet Sarah held her ground, covering the team's retreat step by step. Amid the battle, Sarah's mind flashed to her training. The brutal early mornings, the endless drills, the mental toughness courses designed to break and rebuild her spirit. All of it had prepared her for this moment. She recalled the words of her commanding officer: "Pain is temporary. Strength is forever." Those words were etched into her soul, fueling her determination. Suddenly, another burst of gunfire exploded nearby. Sarah felt a sharp sting in her side, but she refused to acknowledge it. Her focus was singular: protect her team and get them to safety. She dragged herself forward, using every ounce of willpower to move despite the searing pain. Her breathing was ragged now, sweat mixing with the blood soaking her uniform. The sound of helicopter blades in the distance was like a beacon of hope. The extraction team was close, but so was the enemy. The jungle seemed to close in around them. Every second weighted with danger. Sarah's teammates moved swiftly, their trust in her unwavering despite her injury. She was more than their leader. She was their shield. As the enemy pressed harder, Sarah spotted a narrow clearing ahead, their chance to reach the helicopter landing zone. With a final surge of strength, she rallied her team, urging them forward through the undergrowth. The pain was a constant roar in her leg, but she blocked it out, focusing only on the goal. Survival wasn't just about escaping the jungle. It was about proving that even wounded, they could fight on. The team burst into the clearing just as the helicopter's searchlight cut through the night. The blades kicked up dust and leaves, the roar drowning out the sounds of gunfire. Sarah stumbled but kept moving, leaning on her comrades for support. They made it to the skids just as enemy fire flared behind them. The pilot lifted the helicopter into the air, the cool night breeze rushing past. Safe, but not unscathed, Sarah sank into the seat, her body trembling from exhaustion and pain. The jungle faded below them, but the battle was far from over. She closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The mission had tested her in ways she never imagined, and she had survived. But the true fight was only beginning. Every breath Sarah took was sharp and shallow, the pain in her leg a relentless, burning reminder of the bullet that had found its mark. The helicopter's roar was deafening, yet inside, a strange silence wrapped around her, a silence born from shock and determination. She clenched her jaw, refusing to let the agony drown out her focus. The mission wasn't over, and neither was she. The team surrounded her, their faces masks of exhaustion and concern. They had all been pushed to the edge, but Sarah's injury made her the unexpected center of attention. She wanted to speak, to reassure them she was fine, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that she was still with them, still fighting. Her mind replayed the moments before the bullet struck, the sudden gunfire, the rush of adrenaline, the chaos of battle. Time had slowed, every second stretching into eternity. She remembered the feel of the cold metal of her rifle, the bark of the jungle echoing around her, the fierce determination in her teammates' eyes. Those memories were a lifeline, a reminder of why she kept going. The medic, Jake Reynolds, moved beside her swiftly. His hands were steady and sure as he examined the wound, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're tougher than I thought," he said quietly. Sarah managed a faint smile, but remained silent. Talking was hard. The pain was gnawing at her, but worse was the fear of being a burden. Jake's gaze held hers, searching for any sign of weakness. Instead, he found something rare, a strength that went beyond the physical. "Where did you learn to take this kind of pain and still lead?" he asked softly. The question hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. Sarah's eyes flickered, the silence between them stretching. She thought about the countless hours of training, the brutal days that had shaped her into a soldier capable of bearing more than most. It wasn't just the physical drills, it was the mental fortitude, the discipline to push through when every instinct screamed to stop. Pain was something she had learned to accept, to control, to silence. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. "It's not about ignoring the pain," she said. "It's about not letting it control you." Jake nodded, respect deepening in his eyes. He had seen many soldiers hurt in battle, but few who carried their wounds with such quiet dignity. Around them, the rest of the team was organizing supplies, preparing for the next phase of the mission. The war didn't pause for injuries, and Sarah knew she had to be ready. The extraction was just the beginning. What came next was unknown, but her resolve was firm. She had fought too hard to let this be the end. Memories of her early days in the military surfaced, long nights spent drilling until her body begged for mercy, lessons learned in silence, and the unspoken bond with those who had come before her. She was part of something bigger, a legacy of strength and sacrifice. That thought was a balm to her battered spirit. Despite the pain, Sarah forced herself to focus on the here and now. She needed to be alert, to keep her team safe. The jungle had tested them all, but she was determined to show that even wounded, she was far from broken. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strength hidden beneath layers of grit and courage. As the helicopter moved through the dark sky, carrying them away from a firefight, Sarah's thoughts were already on the future. Recovery would be long and painful, but it was just another challenge to overcome. She had faced worse and survived. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Sarah Matthews was not a soldier who gave up. She was a warrior shaped by pain, silence, and unyielding will. And she was ready for whatever came next. The helicopter finally touched down on the base's landing pad, its blade slicing through the humid night air before slowing to a stop. The sudden quiet was almost jarring after the chaos of the mission. Sarah felt the tremors of pain ripple through her injured leg as she climbed down the ramp, her every movement deliberate and controlled. The adrenaline that had fueled her moments ago was fading, replaced by a cold, creeping exhaustion. Medics rushed forward, their faces focused and efficient, but Sarah barely registered their presence. She was fixated on one thing: the team. Every face she saw was a reminder of the mission's cost and the fragile thread by which they had all hung. Her silence wasn't from weakness. It was the weight of what she had endured and what she still had to face. Jake Reynolds stayed by her side, his presence a steady anchor. He didn't press her to talk, just walked with her, offering quiet strength. After the medical team whisked Sarah away for a thorough examination, Jake stayed behind to brief the commanding officers. Yet, his mind kept drifting back to her, the woman who had faced a bullet and said nothing. Later, in a sterile hospital room, Sarah lay still, the cool air contrasting with the fever burning inside her. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, but all she could focus on was the wound that threatened to take more than just her strength. The pain was a constant companion, but Sarah welcomed it in a strange way. It was proof she was alive, proof she had survived. Jake returned to her bedside, his eyes searching for signs beyond the obvious physical injuries. "You don't talk much," he said softly. Sarah looked at him, the silence stretching between them. Finally, she admitted, "Sometimes words aren't enough. Sometimes silence says more." He nodded, understanding more than she could say. "I've seen a lot of soldiers come through here," he continued, "but you're different. You carry your pain in a way that speaks louder than any cry." Sarah's gaze drifted to the window, the moonlight casting pale shadows on the floor. Her mind wandered back to the early days of her training, the endless drills designed to break her spirit, the nights spent fighting doubt, and the relentless push to be more than just a soldier. It was those moments that had built her silence, her strength. "I learned early on," she said quietly, "that pain can either destroy you or make you stronger. I chose to make it stronger." Jake listened, the respect in his eyes growing. There was a raw honesty in her words, a vulnerability wrapped in steel. The days that followed were filled with quiet routines, checkups, physical therapy, and moments of reflection. Sarah's body was healing, but the battles inside her mind were far from over. The memories of that night, the gunfire, the pain, the fear, lurked just beneath the surface. Jake often found her staring out the window, lost in thought. One evening he asked, "What keeps you going when it all feels too much?" Sarah didn't answer right away. Then, with a steady voice, she said, "The people who depend on me, the promise that I'll come back to them." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Here was a woman who had faced death and chosen to keep fighting, not for glory, but for the quiet hope of return. Her silence was not surrender. It was a shield forged from pain and resilience. As she prepared to leave the hospital, Sarah felt a shift inside herself. The war had changed her, but it had not broken her. She was still the same woman who had stepped into the jungle with resolve. But now, there was something new, a deeper understanding of strength and survival. Jake walked with her to the exit, the night air cool against her healing skin. "You surprised everyone out there," he said, "but I think you surprised yourself the most." Sarah looked at him, a small, genuine smile breaking through. "Maybe," she replied, "but this isn't the end. It's just another beginning." The silence that had once been a shield was now a statement. Sarah Matthews was a soldier, a survivor, and above all, a woman who refused to be defined by pain or silence. Her story was far from over. The weeks following her discharge from the hospital were a battle of a different kind. Sarah found herself back at the base, the once familiar corridors now feeling foreign and quiet. The physical wounds were healing, but the silence inside her was heavier than ever. Every step she took was measured, cautious, not just because of her leg, but because she was wrestling with memories that refused to stay buried. Her teammates had returned to their duties, moving forward as if nothing had changed. But Sarah knew better. The jungle had left its mark, not just on her body, but on her soul. She kept her distance, watching from the sidelines as others carried on. The strong, silent soldier was now a woman weighed down by invisible scars. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window of the common room, Sarah sat alone, staring at her hands. She thought about the moment in the jungle when Jake Reynolds, the medic, had asked about her training. It was a question she hadn't answered fully, one she had buried beneath layers of silence and pain. Now, she realized she needed to confront it, not for anyone else, but for herself. Her mind drifted back to the grueling days of basic training. The relentless physical drills, the early mornings filled with shouting instructors, the biting cold and searing heat. But more than that, she remembered the moments when the world felt like it was closing in, the nights lying awake, questioning if she was strong enough to carry on. It was in those moments that she found her answer. Training wasn't just about physical strength. It was about mental endurance. It was about learning to accept pain, fear, and doubt without letting them define you. It was about silence, the silence that comes from knowing your own limits and choosing to push beyond them anyway. That was what Jake had seen in her. That was what made her different. Sarah realized she had spent too long hiding behind that silence. It was time to speak, not to explain or justify, but to share the truth of her experience. She reached out to Jake, and soon they found themselves sitting together, the weight of unspoken words between them. "I never told you the full story," she said softly. Jake shook his head. "I want to hear it." She took a deep breath and began to talk, not just about the mission, but about everything that had led her there. The fears she had buried, the doubts she had fought, and the strength she had discovered in the quietest moments. She spoke of pain and resilience, of the loneliness that sometimes accompanied being a soldier and a woman in a world that expected toughness, but rarely showed understanding. Jake listened without interruption, his respect for her growing with every word. When she finished, he smiled and said, "You survived because you never stopped fighting, even when you couldn't speak." That conversation became a turning point for Sarah. The silence that once protected her now felt like a chain. She began to open up more to her team, to her family, and most importantly, to herself. It wasn't easy. The memories were raw, and the healing was slow. But with every word spoken, the burden lightened. Sarah's leadership grew stronger, not despite her vulnerability, but because of it. She learned that true strength wasn't about hiding pain or fear. It was about facing them head-on and inspiring others to do the same. Her teammates saw a new side of her, a woman who could lead with courage and compassion. Months passed, and Sarah returned to training, not as the same soldier who had left, but as someone transformed. She pushed her body harder, not to prove anything to anyone, but to reclaim the power she thought she had lost. The scars on her leg were a reminder of the battle, but they didn't define her. One evening, as she stood beneath the stars, Sarah felt a quiet peace. The jungle was far behind her now, but its lessons remained etched in her heart. She had faced the silence and found her voice. And in that voice, she carried the story of every woman who had ever been wounded and silenced, but refused to stay that way. The days after her return to training were filled with sweat, grit, and the quiet hum of determination. Sarah Matthews pushed herself harder than ever before. Every muscle screamed, every breath burned, but she welcomed it. This was her way of reclaiming control, not just over her body, but over the story her life was telling. She wasn't going to be defined by that bullet or the silence it had once forced upon her. Her team watched with a mixture of admiration and surprise. The woman who had come back wounded and silent was now leading the pack in drills and endurance runs. But Sarah knew that the true battle was not just physical. It was inside her mind. Each step, each push-up, each long, grueling run was a quiet victory over the doubt and fear that had tried to take root. One morning, during a particularly brutal obstacle course, Sarah stumbled. Her injured leg faltered on a narrow beam, and for a brief moment, old fears bubbled to the surface. The pain flared sharply, reminding her of the jungle, the bullet, the darkness she had fought through. But instead of falling, she steadied herself, breathing deep. She remembered why she was here, to be stronger, to be louder than the silence. Her commanding officer noticed the struggle and approached quietly after the exercise. "You've changed," he said. "Not just physically, but something deeper. What's your secret?" Sarah looked him in the eye and answered, "I stopped running from my pain. I learned to carry it with me, instead of letting it carry me." That simple truth resonated with those around her. It wasn't about pretending to be invincible. It was about owning every part of your story, no matter how difficult. Sarah's leadership began to shift from strict discipline to inspiration. She was no longer just the soldier who survived a mission gone wrong. She was a symbol of resilience, a beacon for those who struggled in silence. But the journey wasn't without setbacks. Late nights were haunted by memories, flashbacks of gunfire, the smell of burning jungle, the faces of comrades who hadn't made it back. Sometimes the silence returned, heavy and suffocating, threatening to undo all the progress she had made. One night, during a particularly dark moment, Sarah found herself alone on the base's training field. The stars above were cold and distant, mirroring the isolation she felt inside. She sat on the ground, her breath shallow, and let the tears come. For the first time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, not to anyone else, but to herself. It was in that raw moment that she realized true strength wasn't about silence or toughness. It was about honesty. With that honesty came healing. Sarah wiped her tears away, stood up, and made a silent promise to herself. She would never let fear or pain silence her again. The next day, Sarah gathered her team for a meeting. Her voice was steady, filled with the quiet authority of someone who had been to the edge and come back stronger. She shared parts of her story, not the polished version, but the raw, unfiltered truth. She spoke of pain, fear, and the power of facing both head-on. Her teammates listened, some with tears, others with quiet nods. Sarah's story became a bridge, a connection that went beyond ranks and roles. They saw her not just as a leader, but as a human being who had faced darkness and found light. In the weeks that followed, the team's bond grew tighter. They trained harder, fought smarter, and supported each other in ways they never had before. Sarah's leadership had transformed the unit into more than just soldiers. They had become a family. Sarah herself felt a new kind of peace. The wounds in her body would heal with time, but the wounds in her heart were being mended by something stronger: truth, connection, and the refusal to be silenced. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, Sarah felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next with open eyes and an open heart. The jungle had tested her, but it had not broken her. It had made her stronger, louder, and more alive than ever before. Months had passed since Sarah had returned from that fateful mission, but the memories still clung to her like a shadow. The jungle's silence was replaced by the buzz of the base, yet inside, a quiet storm raged. Sarah had transformed from the wounded soldier into a leader who inspired with honesty and strength. But the battle within was far from over. One morning, as dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah stood at the edge of the training field, watching the sunrise. Her leg was almost fully healed, but she knew the real test wasn't physical recovery. It was emotional. She thought about the team, the trust they had placed in her, and the example she had to set. Leadership was more than giving orders. It was about showing courage when everything inside screamed to give up. That day, the commanding officer approached her with a new assignment. "We have intel on an upcoming operation," he said. "It's risky, the kind that will test every bit of your strength and leadership." Sarah's heart tightened. The jungle was calling again, but this time she was different. She had faced fear and silence, and survived. The preparation for the mission was intense. Sarah and her team pored over maps, studied enemy patterns, and drilled relentlessly. Every detail mattered. Sarah's experience gave her an edge. She knew what it was like to be wounded and to keep going. She made sure her team was ready not just physically but mentally. As the mission day approached, Sarah gathered her team. "This won't be easy," she said, voice steady. "But we've been through worse. We'll watch each other's backs. We'll listen. And most importantly, we'll speak up when we need to." Her words were simple but powerful. They knew the cost of silence and the power of voice. The operation began before dawn. The jungle was thick with mist, shadows blending into one another. Sarah led with a calm focus, every step calculated. The team moved silently, communicating with hand signals and whispered words. The memory of her own injury kept her alert. She watched for every possible threat. Midway through the mission, they encountered heavy resistance. The enemy was prepared, and the firefight erupted quickly. Bullets zipped through the air, and the jungle was alive with noise. Sarah took cover, but kept her eyes on her team, shouting orders and encouragement. Her leg ached, but she refused to let it slow her. Suddenly, one of her teammates was hit. The fear in that moment was sharp and immediate, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, her medic training taking over. The team formed a protective circle as Sarah worked swiftly, her hands steady despite the chaos. The wounded soldier's breathing was shallow, but Sarah's calm reassured everyone. As the firefight continued, Sarah's mind raced. She remembered that night when Jake had asked about her training, the question that had pushed her to face her own silence. Now, in the heat of battle, she understood the true meaning of strength. It wasn't just about physical toughness, it was about connection, courage, and the willingness to face vulnerability head-on. With the wounded soldier stabilized, Sarah signaled the team to move. They navigated the jungle with urgency, the helicopter extraction point their only hope. Every sound seemed amplified, the crack of branches, the thud of footsteps, the pounding of her own heart. When they finally reached the clearing, the helicopter's blades whipped the air into a frenzy. The team scrambled aboard, the tension in the jungle replaced by the roar of the engines. Sarah sank into her seat, the exhaustion catching up to her. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was filled with something new, hope. Sarah's voice, once quiet and guarded, was now a steady force. She had faced the darkness and found her strength, not alone, but with her team beside her. The jungle had tested her again, but she had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a leader who could inspire through pain and courage. As the helicopter lifted away, Sarah looked out over the canopy one last time. The mission was far from over, but she knew this. Silence could no longer hold her. Her voice was her power, and she was ready to lead, no matter what came next. The helicopter touched down with a thunderous roar, kicking up dust and leaves as it settled on the base. Sarah's body was bruised and aching, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. The mission had pushed her to her limits, physically, mentally, emotionally. But she had emerged stronger, a leader forged in the fire of battle and silence. As the ramp lowered, the team moved swiftly to unload, their faces tired but alive. Sarah felt their eyes on her, not just the eyes of comrades, but of those who had witnessed her transformation. No longer was she the wounded, silent soldier. She was their leader, their anchor, the woman who had faced darkness and refused to be broken. Back at the command center, the debriefing was thorough. Sarah listened carefully, her mind sharp despite exhaustion. She gave input, shared observations, and most importantly, praised her team. They had fought bravely, supported one another, and survived. She made sure they knew their efforts were not in vain. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, Sarah allowed herself a moment to reflect. The journey from silence to strength had been long and winding. She thought of Jake Reynolds, the medic who had seen through her silence and asked the question that changed everything. She thought of the jungle, the bullet, the pain, and the choice she made every day to carry on. Her phone buzzed softly. It was a message from Jake. "You surprised me then. You inspire me now." A small smile touched her lips. The wound on her leg was healing, but the deeper wounds, the fears, the doubts, were healing too. Not overnight, but with time, patience, and courage. Sarah's story was no longer one of just survival. It was a story of resilience, of finding voice in silence, and strength in vulnerability. She had become more than a soldier. She was a symbol, a reminder that true courage is not the absence of fear or pain, but the will to move forward despite them. In the days that followed, Sarah began sharing her story more openly. She spoke at briefings, mentored younger soldiers, and reached out to women who struggled with their own battles. Her voice carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it was honest. The base changed too. Where silence once marked pain and fear, now there was conversation and support. Sarah's courage to speak had sparked something powerful, a community bound by trust and understanding. One afternoon, as she walked through the training grounds, a young soldier approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am," she said, "thank you for showing me that it's okay to be scared, but still fight." Sarah nodded, the weight of those words settling deep inside her. This was why she had fought, to be a light in the dark for others. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the base. Sarah stood tall, her silhouette strong against the fading light. The battles she had faced were far from over, but she no longer feared the silence. She had learned to speak through it. Her journey, from wounded and silent to brave and vocal, was a testament to the human spirit. To every woman who had faced pain, doubt, or fear, Sarah's story whispered a powerful truth. You are not alone. You are stronger than you know, and your voice matters. As night settled over the base, Sarah closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the stillness. The jungle had tested her, the silence had challenged her, but she had chosen to rise. And rise she would, time and time again. Because in the end, strength is not just in surviving, it's in thriving, speaking out, and inspiring others to do the same.